What's going on, everybody? Raees Mohamed here, founding partner of R.M. Warner Law. Here today to talk about a very, very interesting legal issue relating to the Call Her Daddy podcast. Have you guys heard of the Call Her Daddy podcast? I know it's got pretty significant following, but from a lawyer's perspective, it's even more interesting, especially if you're a lawyer who deals with e-commerce, influencer, marketing, and advertising issues like I do. It's actually a core part of my practice, something that very few lawyers really deal with on a day-to-day. Some lawyers, as you can tell from this story that you're about to hear, or if you already know, dabble in it, pretend to be experts, but they're really not. I feel like a little bit of a background would be particularly helpful. I think most people sort of know the story, again, but I think it's important to give you guys the perspective of what a lawyer who's looking at this from the outside. Granted, we don't have all of the facts, but the Call Her Daddy podcast dispute has raised just a ton of issues about what really happened, what were the implications, how could this have been avoided, if at all, and I think it's just a topic that's worthy of discussion, particularly because tomorrow, for those of you who follow the podcast, Alex Cooper is planning to do the show solo, or at least without Sofia for the first time. So let's get started. Well, we had a question right off the bat. What does the IP of the podcast legally entail? Great question. So just jumping right off the bat, intellectual property rights are a key part of this dispute, right? And before I even answer the question, maybe it's helpful if I just kind of recap what's happened. As all of you know, there's essentially four parties in this issue. You have Alex Cooper and Sofia Franklyn. Everybody knows them. They are the ones who do the podcast. You have David Portnoy, who's the president of Barstool, who is the publisher of the Call Her Daddy podcast. And then you have this guy they call the Suitman, who is Peter Nelson. As it turns out, he's an important third party to the podcast. But anyway, in a nutshell, the facts are really important here. And so we don't know all the facts. There was a contract that was leaked by, I think, the New York Post. But Alex Cooper maintains that the contract is not the real contract. It was a draft. And so it may not actually be the contract that we have to start with for our analysis. But what we can say so far is this is what we know. They had a contract to do the podcast, Call Her Daddy, for 3 years. The first year was $75,000. Second year, $85,000. Third year, $100,000. But every year, and this is important, every year they had the opportunity to renegotiate their compensation. At least that's my understanding. You can comment if you understand differently. But interesting fact is they both got a raise within or right after their first year. So they were making more than $75,000. For added context, I thought it was interesting that we know from Alex Cooper's public statements that she was broke. She didn't have a job. She's not a serial entrepreneur. She's not somebody that was famous and then started a podcast. She was nobody. She didn't have much of an Instagram following. She had no social following. I think that carries a lot of weight here, as we're going to find out. And I think the same is true of Sofia Franklyn. I don't think anybody really knew who these people were. Anyway, coming back to the contract terms. Alex, as we hear from her story, admittedly bargained for more money. And she bargained for more money because she was doing more work. We'll talk about in a partnership why this is important in a legal partnership. But from what we understand, Alex admits to the fact that she went to Barstool and asked for more money because she felt that she was doing more work, such as editing. And editing, for those of you who edit video, it could take longer than the shoot itself, sometimes double or triple the time. It's a lot of work. And I think 2.5 years, I think this was 2 years into the deal. Well, even before we get there, I think they had shot like 4 podcasts before this had taken off, right? So Sofia connected with Alex, or Alex connected with Sofia, whatever that details, it doesn't matter here. But the point is that they had about 4 shows before they got what I call big time with Barstool. For context, guys, Barstool is one of the top 10 internet publishers in the world, possibly top 5. I mean, they're absolutely huge company from the internet and media publication standpoint. It would be like getting drafted into the NFL, frankly speaking. I know that David Portnoy is a sophisticated businessman. He started this business, I think, 15 to 17 years ago, before podcasting was even hot. So he's a sophisticated guy. And from what I understand, and I've watched a lot of his video and I've heard a lot of his points of view on this, he's a very straight shooter. He has no reason not to be. He already has, a $200 million, $300 million enterprise, perhaps even more. So anyway, we digress. So at some point, they get picked up by Barstool 4 episodes into the podcast. And Barstool offers to do exactly what it does best, and that is make it go on fire, right? Pour gasoline on a flame. That's what they do. That's what they did, and that's what they did with these gals. At some point, Mr. Suitman gets into the picture and encouraged Sofia to sort of renege on her contract. And this is where the legal part really gets interesting. Again, I haven't seen the contract, so we have to just take what we've heard. I have heard Alex's version. I've heard some of Sofia's version. I've heard the CEO of Barstool, Erica Nardini, talk about what she's reaffirmed essentially is Alex's position. So, I'm not taking sides here. I'm just going off with the facts that we know. And frankly, I tend to believe, or I tend to see the light in what Alex has said in her YouTube video, and it sort of corroborates what Erica has said and what David Portnoy are saying. Anyway, for what it's worth. At some point in time, Sofia's boyfriend, who's Suitman, and he's I don't know how to put this. He's been in the media before. He's negotiated terms before. He comes into the picture and says, listen, ladies, you are not getting paid industry standard. And I love that phrase, because industry standard can really mean a lot of different things depending on the context and what industry you're in. So he pitched this idea that, Sofia and Alex, you're not making industry standard pay for a podcast that's as successful as you are. So why don't we renegotiate your terms completely? Okay, not simply your annual pay, but everything. And so at some point, he refers, and as a lawyer, I think this was really kind of shady. He refers Sofia and Alex to 1 or 2 lawyers of his choice. And maybe he did that because these gals don't know lawyers. Or maybe he did it for more nefarious reasons. Hard to tell. But my take on it is, you're a content creator, things are getting hot, you don't know who to call, maybe you trust your partner's boyfriend's referral. As we know now, not a good idea. So Sofia maintains that they both agreed to find alternatives instead of Barstool. Alex maintains that they never were looking at anybody else, and it was purely Sofia, a greedy business partner, trying to get a better deal. Here's where the law comes in. You have an active contract at this point. No one's disputing that the contract was in place. I think what was being disputed was at what point this contract allowed them to do things outside of the contract, meaning renegotiate their annual pay. And Sofia takes a position that, hey, I'm the talent. I'm allowed to shop this around. We were just trying to get a better deal. How do I know I'm worth what I'm being paid? How do I know I'm not worth more? Maybe that would involve, shopping this around a little bit. From a logic standpoint, it would make sense. From a legal standpoint, it's very underhanded. You're already in a deal. You're in a great deal, by the way. We'll talk about why this was a great deal. And look at Barstool's perspective for just a minute. You are one of the largest internet publication companies in the world. You have one of the hottest podcasts in the world. And your advertisers, your revenue source, are relying on that weekly content. What are you going to tell them? when there's a dispute, suddenly, where parties get greedy and want to do something outside of their contract, right? Keep that in the back of your mind as we're talking about this. Anyway, Sofia gets this brilliant idea to basically follow her boyfriend's lead. Now, I don't think Sofia has taken the position, and if you're listening, Sofia, maybe you can tell us. I haven't heard it, but Sofia maintains that she just wanted to shop this around herself or see if she could get a better deal. David Portnoy, Erica Nardini seem to suggest with 99% certainty that Suitman, Peter, jumped into this, Peter Nelson, trying to basically crowbar his way into the deal through his girlfriend, meaning he really thought he could get them a better deal. Who knows? The guy could have been taking the position that he was Sofia's agent. Maybe we'll never know. If litigation ensues, then maybe we'll find out, and it will be highly watched. But I want everyone to understand something very, very simple. There was a contract in place. This was not a free agent scenario. They were not free agents. They were employees, which makes a significant difference in terms of what your options are. Let's talk about your options for a second. If you are an employee and you are hired to produce content, who owns your content? Anybody want to take a guess? If you are employed by a podcast company or any broadcast company and you are creating content, who owns it? Your employer does. That's essentially every jurisdiction in the United States. The employer owns it. Barstool owns all of the content. Let me say that again. Barstool owns all of the content. That includes all the memes, all the trademark, statements, Daddy Gang or whatever the statements are. Maybe you guys can drop some of them in the comments. I don't remember all of them. All of the logos, all the personas that spawn off of this. Most importantly, the content, the streaming rights, everything is owned by Barstool. That's what you get paid handsomely for. Now, some people will say, well, Raees, is $75,000 a good deal when you are coming out with a bombshell podcast? Let's put this in perspectives. So that is a part of IP. 100%, it's part of IP. So let's just make a sports analogy. For those of you who watch sports or understand how the entertainment industry sort of works generally. LeBron James, when he came into the NBA as an 18, 19-year-old straight out of high school, he got $4 million a year. He signed to a contract, his rookie salary, for $4 million a year. Now, you might look at it and say, this dude's crushing it. This guy is better than any point guard, is better than any basketball player I've ever seen. He's straight out of high school. Pay the kid more money, right? He's talented. He's doing great work. The flip side of it is, nobody knows who you are yet. Nobody knows who you are. Yeah, you were scouted out of high school. You're clearly talented, but that doesn't mean that you can get $100 million your first year. And thank God LeBron James is as humble as a guy as he was. Because it turns out today, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but LeBron James has a $153 million multi-year contract with the Lakers as of 2018. $153 million. And he has endorsements that probably match that with Nike. If he was a greedy fool and said, Nike, I don't want to talk to you guys, I'm worth way more than that. Or, hey Lakers, or hey Cleveland, or whomever, I'm worth way more than what you guys are paying me. I know I'm a superstar. So I'm going to go and negotiate. Doesn't work that way. In business, rule number one, and this is a little beyond the legal side, be humble. Be humble. Build a following. Build a brand. Make sure your employer, your advertisers, your partners, they want you. And make sure you're not replaceable. The second you're replaceable, you're worth zero. You're worth zero. So I think sports analogies really help. Let me give you another analogy before we dive into the crux of legal. When is the last time, well, how many people are big music fans and just maybe randomly listen to music on YouTube, maybe independent musicians or cover artists, right? I do. I'm always scouring my playlist for new stuff. Well, there are a ton of talented independent artists out there. There's a ton. Some of them more worthy of playtime than major artists. So what does this have to do with Call Her Daddy? What does this have to do with podcasting? Because the talent is everywhere. Talent is everywhere. It's the hard work and the publication that is getting hooked up with somebody who can broadcast and get you at scale to millions of listeners around the world. That is what matters. Did you guys hear that? It is not just the talent. It is somebody giving you an opportunity, somebody saying, hey, you know what? We love you. We're going to help you build an audience. We're going to take a bet on you because, frankly speaking, Barstool is forking up a lot of money. There's all kinds of external production costs, advertising costs, running costs, payroll that needs to be met. And they're not guaranteed $1 yet. So keep that in mind. Is it not? How many podcasts? There's 500,000 podcasts currently, probably more. There's 500,000 published podcasts out there. So do they, are they just crap? Is that why, Call Her Daddy got popular and big? I think it's a little bit more than that. There are plenty of podcasts that talk about sexy, salacious, or dirty things that sort of appeal to the prurient interest, right? That make people sort of, pique their interest in dating and sexuality and all. There's plenty. Just go to the Google Play Store or Apple, and search for podcasts and top. There's a ton. The difference is you have a big name like Barstool. You have Alex on one hand and you have Sofia on the other. One of them clearly got greedy, and I think that was Sofia. And too soon, too much too soon, she's asking for way more than, let's not talk about worth. She's asking for way more than what they had agreed to without a sufficient basis. Now, I just want to kind of break down some of the things that I sort of researched on this topic from a legal standpoint, right? Well, first of all, the numbers matter. And according to Barstool, according to David Portnoy, he's very, very open about this, he probably would have given Sofia and Alex what they wanted, or Sofia's specific demand, which was $500,000 or $1 million, close to $1 million. Here's the stupid thing. Never in the history of Barstool have they ever given the commissions and overrides on merchandise that they were offering to Alex and Sofia. That tells you something. That tells you David Portnoy is a smart man. He knew that they were worth a lot. And the merch, that alone could have doubled or tripled their pay. $500,000 was a baseline. A baseline. So just to go back, $500,000 is essentially what the rooftop conversation ended at before Sofia wanted more. My mind just blows when I hear that, because here's the key part of this. They were offered the IP. I'm going to repeat that. They were offered in the last round of negotiations to keep the intellectual property related to the podcasts. Now, we don't have the contract in front of us. We don't know exactly what the intellectual property would have been, but what we know from at least looking at it from an outsider's view is all of the podcast broadcast rights. Okay, because remember we talked about if you're an employee, your employer owns the podcast. Well, if you own the podcast rights, you can distribute it to anybody you want, or you can sign an exclusivity for more money, or you can create video, right? So I don't know how many of you know this, but Sofia and Alex were filming video along with their podcast. Well, the video is a separate intellectual property right. Copyright law is kind of like a bundle of sticks, and broadcast rights, video rights, audio rights, transcript rights, those are all different rights, but in the same bundle of sticks. So if somebody says you own the intellectual property, you own all of the bundles in that, all of the sticks in that bundle, which means you can do whatever you want with it. Imagine now them spinning off their own merchandise, their own alcohol brand. I mean, talk about short-sighted. The intellectual property is everything. With e-commerce, your following is everything. Your ability to leverage your intellectual property is everything. But my point is, the intellectual property was worth way more than the $500,000 that was on the table. Every lawyer knows that entertainment rights, 99% of it is intellectual property. Licensing, exclusivities, merch, ticket sales, streaming content rights, all of it is intellectual property rights. So if you could hold on to those rights, you're king, or queen in this case, right? So walking away from that was sheer stupidity. Something that I thought was interesting for those of you who have ever hired a lawyer or have ever been in business, Sofia and Alex apparently had the same lawyer. And we hear sort of granules of this during the negotiation, but having the same lawyer to negotiate a deal when you know that both partners are not on the same page is deadly. And I'm hoping the lawyer who was negotiating this deal got the appropriate conflict waivers, because clearly there was a big conflict, and clearly she couldn't proceed in advising one client over the other in terms of what's best. So pro tip number 10 for this video, which is have your own lawyer. Either the lawyer represents the company as a whole, and I don't think Sofia and Alex had a company. Even if they did, have the lawyer represent the company. Don't have the lawyer represent two individual partners in the same deal. Best case scenario, each person gets their own lawyer. We talk about industry standards. We look at market comparables. We look at what's going on in the marketplace. Of course, fact specific and industry specific. But we're looking specifically here at the podcast market blowing up. And there's no question in my mind. Again, David Portnoy is a smart guy. He is a marketing genius. He understands the value of a true brand. He would have absolutely negotiated that salary up. And again, $500,000, which was on the table, ready to be signed. Again, Alex, from my understanding, that's what she signed up for. $500,000 is a base. The merchandise will take it well in excess of that, right? That could have increased next year. Who knows, $2 million. The other endorsement deals, especially if they're independent contractors. Remember what we said from a legal standpoint. If you're an independent contractor, maybe I didn't say this. If you're an independent contractor, let's say you're a photographer, and you take pictures of people on Instagram, right? Arguably, the pictures that you take, you own it, right? You have to assign the rights to those images, assign the rights to the content to the person that hired you to do it. Automatically, by law, they are still the photographers. We call that a work made for hire under the Copyright Act, not to get into technicalities. But if, in fact, it was legitimately on the table that you could own your own intellectual property rights to the podcast and related content, I mean, there is an unlimited amount of money on the table at that point. And I just feel like it was a major oversight. And I feel terrible for Alex because she had to go through this whole public fiasco. And really, it's embarrassing for everybody. I think Sofia should have been smarter. She should have played her cards correctly. My understanding is they literally got laughed at by David Portnoy. David is a colorful guy. I don't know him personally, but from what I've watched and what I've read, colorful is just one way to put it. What are some of the questions that we had here? I missed a couple of questions. Do you think Sofia will still end up suing Barstool? Dave mentioned her potentially suing Alex. That's a good question, Claire. My answer is I think yes. The reason why I say that is because Alex at this point has everything. Sofia has nothing. Poof, gone. Your millions of dollars you could have made this year are gone. And so I do think that there's a couple of possibilities from a legal standpoint. For one, if indeed Sofia breached her contract and if indeed it caused harm to Barstool, I don't see that it being far-fetched that Barstool, in fact, sues Sofia. But from what I understand for Barstool, this is small peanuts for them. From the standpoint of, we don't really care about you, Sofia. We'll find any, pretty girl who has the ability to create content. And again, not my words, but David Portnoy's words. They're a dime a dozen. They just need the publication rights, right? The audience at scale. At any rate, I think another possibility is that Sofia sues Barstool and Alex. I don't think it's a lawsuit because I think you have a counterclaim that would push this over the edge, because I could see Barstool suing Peter Nelson for in California and in most jurisdictions we have this concept of intentional interference with contractual relations. Sorry, I just lost my chain of thought for a second. Intentional interference with contractual relations is a tort, and that could potentially subject Sofia to punitive damages. And at this point, I don't think it's disputed what she did. So Haley asked, if Alex now owns 75% of the IP, how much control will she have over content that is released, money made off the content? Good question. So let's just assume, there's a 75% ownership of IP. Again, hard to tell in the abstract in terms of value and worth. But what we could say is, let's just say, advertisers are willing to spend $100 million. And let's assume that Alex knows this fact. Alex could say, listen, I am responsible for generating $75 million. $75 million of revenue. Can I get a override or percentage of ownership based on my 75% ownership? She could also take the 75%, and the reason why this is difficult in the abstract is it 75% of the podcast? Is it 100% of the podcast, but only 25% of the merchandise? Like, what is contained within that IP? That's the key question. Assuming it's 75% of the podcast, you would still have to get 25% of the owner. That's of the other owner's permission. So this is why it's a little bit tricky. But certainly you have the negotiating leverage, right? One thing that I didn't talk about yet is co-inventorship. If you are a co-inventor, that means that you jointly created a work of authorship under the Copyright Act. And so audio content counts, video content counts, artistic design counts, and you're working in a team environment. So like Alex and Sofia, you are co-inventors. In the absence of an agreement, and in this case, there was an agreement with Barstool. In the absence of an agreement, you're co-inventors. And co-inventors have the exclusive rights jointly to do whatever they want. And oftentimes legally without the other co-author's permission. It's the contractual rights that are put into place that sort of protect that from happening. And that's why it's important if you work on a team, or if you work on with one other person, or if you're working with content creators or brands, or even a photographer or videographer, that you have this documented in writing. Once you do that, you can sort of sketch out who has the right to do what. Otherwise, it just becomes sloppy, right? It becomes very, very sloppy. Something else that I want to make sure is 100% clear. What could they have done differently? Oh, there's a question. Can Sofia make another podcast that is similar? Good question. Good question. Depends on what the contract says. If there was a non-compete, or there were exclusive rights, which there had to have been because they were employees, there's no way that David Portnoy and Barstool would have said, yeah, go ahead and create your own content as a spinoff. But I'm 99% certain that they would be precluded from certain types of content. One of the issues in that is if this is California law, under California law, non-competes are not enforceable. There's limited exceptions to that, like when you exit a business, you can have a non-compete that's negotiated. But similar, yeah, maybe Sofia can create a podcast about dating, or maybe she takes a step further and makes it like a directly competitive podcast. It's usually a question of what the contract says. What she can't do is use any of the slogans, Daddy Gang. She can't use any of the logos. She can't use any of the slogans, the podcast clips. She can't do any of that. And arguably, although I think the contract allowed her to have her own Instagram profile, I think that she had that in existence before. But any social sort of outlets that you created, at least in my contracts, if we're starting from zero, meaning let's say you didn't have a Twitter, but you had a hot following on Instagram, I would insist that for my clients, I would insist that any new social media handles are owned by me or my client's brand. That way the brand has leverage. The opposite is also true. If you're an influencer and you're negotiating with brands, I would sure as hell make sure that the only part of the intellectual property you're giving up is what is in existence at the time, and what's being monetized by the brand. That's it. Personally, I think that Sofia may be a good candidate for a freelance gig. Who knows? Maybe Spotify picks her up, or another podcast company. I don't think she's completely lost her edge and ability to do something, but I think she's certainly made herself look like a clown. And her boyfriend, you've seen a lot of hate by David Portnoy against Peter Nelson, the Suitman. They're absolutely right. This guy stuck his nose where legally it shouldn't have been, legally. And again, I've fought lawsuits where a third party has interfered with my client's contract rights. This is exactly what happened here. I don't think anyone's refuting that Peter Nelson stepped in and actually tried to interfere and shop this around. Who knows exactly what the reality was, but definitely another podcast publishing company jumped into the mix to try and get a better deal, if you will, which tells me this: a no shop clause. Make it 100% clear. Again, we don't have the contract in front of us from Barstool to say that the contract did or did not have a no shop clause, but I would make it 100% clear. But sometimes it doesn't stop people who are greedy and looking for a better deal. Since Sofia had merch made out of her mugshot from years ago, Barstool now owns that mugshot and could no longer make money off that photo, correct? Yeah, no, and could no longer make money? Yeah. Sofia could no longer make money off it. 100%. 100%. She's tanked that opportunity. This is why this is like the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And look, $500,000 is a lot of money when you are doing 1 hour to 3 hours of work per week. $500,000. Base starting point. $500,000 to start for you to BS in a studio that's going to be professionally edited, talking about all kinds of salacious things, right? I won't even tarnish my Instagram live by talking about all the things that they talk about. My point is, you had it good. You had it good. And because you listened to this goofball who purports to be some experienced, negotiator, he blew the deal. You didn't get half of what you're asking for. You got zero. And 0 times 0 is 0. So anyway, yes, Sofia is barred from using anything that was assigned. Again, we don't know exactly what that was. If the mugshot was pre-existing, if there was a clause in the contract that exempted pre-existing intellectual property, sometimes I deal with those that way. Maybe she has a right to use it. She certainly doesn't have a right to profit off of it. Do you think HBO will file Peter Nelson because of the scandal? I don't know. It's a great question. I think his standing is really shaky just because they know what kind of personality he is. I mean, again, you're talking about something that was written down on paper. The contract, right here it is. He obviously knew about it. I'm sure his girlfriend even showed it to him. He knew it. He didn't care. He went the extra mile, lost the deal. Certainly bad business judgment. Whether HBO will actually do anything or show sympathy to Peter Nelson, I don't know. I haven't seen any public statements from HBO. If anybody has heard or seen anything from HBO on this topic, feel free to drop it into the comments. But it's going to be interesting to see kind of what happens. Is it Amy? Do you think Sofia will sue Alex? So, yeah, I mean, we talked about the fact that Sofia would make the biggest mistake of her life after losing money to actually try to go after Barstool. She could try to go after Sofia. The truth of the matter is there was no contract between the two of them. And you hear Alex talk about this. This is actually a really good point. Alex talks about how, hey, I wanted this to be 50-50. Well, did you guys have terms between each other? If you'd created, and again, not their fault, they're not sophisticated, but as I would tell any one of my clients, if you are joint venturers, create a formal entity, create an LLC, right? And then you can jointly go and bargain for your rights. More powerful. It's more powerful because neither partner can be treated differently in that scenario. Create a company, go to Barstool and say, hey, we're one. We have our own understanding of how we're going to split profits. That's the surefire way. Listen to me carefully. That's the surefire way to at least make sure that the expectations are set. And that didn't happen here. They were friends. You don't do business with friends. you do business with business partners. And so you have to convert yourself from a friend to a business partner. And I see this all the time, especially with influencers, e-commerce, people people you like, you get into business with them, and it ends terribly because they don't do the formality. And they think lawyers are bad and scary. You only hire a lawyer if it's, something bad, or, hey, I got something on LegalZoom. I don't even think LegalZoom has anything for influencers, by the way. But you should contact somebody like me or a competent lawyer who looks at this and says, look, if you go as a block and negotiate this, you'll get a better deal, right? And perhaps they couldn't have done it to start with because they were employees. You can't really employ a company in the sense that you're not W-2. But they certainly could have done it after. They could have talked to each other and said, look, we understood we'd be 50-50, but there was a breakdown in communication between Alex and Sofia, which is clearly why they didn't do the smart thing to do. And clearly their lawyers, maybe they advised them, we don't know, but I'm speculating here. But I would have pushed both of them to say, listen, you guys need to create a partnership here and then go to Barstool, you'll get a better deal. What do you think of them publicly sharing their sides of the story? Could they use that in court? Could that be used against them? 100% yes. And that could be why Sofia is a little more quiet. Perhaps Alex has the benefit of having Barstool's, seemingly empty pockets for litigation funding. I wouldn't want to be on the receiving end of a lawsuit from Barstool. They're going to have the best lawyers. They're going to have a smart legal team. They're going to have a team. And they'll drown you in litigation. And you're an individual. What money do you have to fight with if you're Alex? The $100,000 you were making in year 2.5. Like, seriously, what do you have? But anything. This is another lesson. Anything you post online or anything you post publicly, or even to a third party, like a text message, can always be discovered in litigation. I've subpoenaed laptops and cell phones and gotten text messages, pretty nasty ones. So you got to be conscious of that. David's a careful guy. I don't think he said anything that his lawyer said, this could come back and bite you. He's voiced his opinion. Creating memes, as much as it could be considered harassment or defamatory, sometimes creating memes saying that you're a douchebag is not really defamatory under the true purist definition of what defamatory is. It's an opinion. It's artful talk. And I'm sure there are plenty of David Portnoy memes about Peter Nelson calling him exactly that. Could things they said in the podcast, for example, episode 1, Sofia said she was here to ride Alex's coattails, could that be used against? Yeah, 100%. This is a great question. Intent of the parties, to the extent it's in question, that would be relevant evidence. Now, it's hearsay, so a lot of technical things that you have to do to get it admitted into court. But you could use it to impeach her if she said, hey, didn't you say in the podcast that you were here to ride my coattails? And if Sofia declined that, she could play the podcast to impeach her credibility. So, yeah, it's really going to be a really interesting fight. Look, I would be lying if I said I didn't really like a good fight. I kind of hope this plays out in court just to set a precedence. Right? Just to set a precedence on why you shouldn't do these things and what content creators, influencers need to think about when they have content creation rights and they attempt to over leverage it and lose a deal completely. Juliana. Hey, Robert. Thanks for joining. Juliana, does Sofia even have any grounds to sue? Seems like she has nothing to go off of. Yeah, again, in the absence of a contract, right? In the absence of real terms, it's hard to say. If there were terms that required them to jointly to bargain together, if there were terms that precluded them from signing a deal without the other because they're co-branded, sort of jointly, they're joint content creators, maybe. But under common law principles, under intellectual property principles, I don't see it because, again, there were employees. It's like trying to sue your coworker, right? Trying to sue your coworker because they got a promotion at work because they were doing their job. And you, my friend, were not. Can't really do much there, right? If she stole business, she stole clients. If this was not an employee-employer situation, maybe there's a defamation claim. Maybe Alex said something that is a false statement and has tarnished Sofia's reputation to be able to get comparable paying work. My argument would be that it's privileged because it's an opinion. It's in the public interest to voice your opinion on what happened, frankly speaking, in a very greedy manner with Sofia. So oral contract, highly, highly unlikely, because the written contract would throw out any oral terms. It would supersede. So again, could you argue it? Yeah, maybe, but at the very least, we know Barstool is sophisticated enough to have contracts between the parties. Now, yeah, could Alex, to your point, Judy, could Alex and Sofia say, well, we had a verbal partnership agreement? Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Partnership is a construct by operation of law. You don't need to have it in writing, which is another reason why I say you should have had it in writing, ladies. But at any rate, I'm glad to see that Alex, tomorrow's their first time, her first time coming back after this whole thing went down. I'm really happy that she's moving forward with what turns out to be just an absolute podcast sensation, something that is just changing the creative mindset of youthful people, those in their 20s and 30s, who's basically the primary marketplace, females in their 20s. And I think that this is really a learning lesson. Again, if you're a content creator, or if you're in the legal world and you're advising content creators, this is like an amazing learning opportunity. And this is an amazing time to kind of look at what you could do to tank a deal and what you could do to be smart. Somebody had asked me, well, Raees, look, what if Barstool said in year 2, you're only getting $85,000. I know we're making millions of dollars off of you on merchandise and sales and advertisement, but we're only going to give you $85,000. That's not what history and the facts tell us. We know that they were both making more than their first year salary, and they got a bonus, which tells us Barstool's not greedy. Once again, you're not going to treat your all-star players like dirt. You're not going to. You're going to treat them like gold. There's every incentive to keep them. So when you hear the facts, when you hear people talking about their side of the story, keep that in the back of your mind. Nobody is an all-star quite yet. They're getting there. They were climbing. But Barstool knew better than anybody else that they were talented. That's why they got them in the first place. Let's not forget that. Of course, they're not going to do anything to screw them. And again, $500,000 is a base pay, which was what was on the table in the rooftop conversation, was an amazing deal for Sofia. And it could have been renegotiated higher from there. Anyway, crazy, crazy interesting stuff. I think, litigation is likely. I would be shocked if I'd be shocked if Barstool was the first one to initiate the litigation. Take a sip of my pre-workout here. But I think that there's certainly a lot of heat. I would be mad if I was Sofia also, because she did lose out completely. But I would be more pissed off at my friend here, Peter Nelson, who lost the deal for everybody.